Hello and welcome to the Somatic Movement and Mindset podcast with me, clinical somatic educator and founder of Total Somatics, Heidi Hadley. The Somatic Movement and Mindset podcast has been designed to help you gain a deeper understanding to how your mind and body work. You will learn about your amazing mind and body and why over time you can feel pain, recurring injuries and poor posture. Within this podcast, I will teach you why this doesn't have to be your future or the norm for you. Would you like to learn how to reduce pain, move freely, and gain a new lease of life? Let's get started. Hello and welcome back. Now in today's episode, this is going to be one of two parts because there's such a lot of questions that come in about this. So what I'd like to do is delve into a question, first of all, that's been asked in different ways from many people, and that is, why do my muscles feel chronically tight? Really good question, very important question too. So let us delve into why that's the case. And I'm also going to tell you about this really funky kind of title that explains why muscles get tight at a brain level. So you're going to learn some terminology today, which is going to start to follow through into the next episode or so. And so basically our muscles feel tight and they can feel fatigued throughout the day. And this can happen from stress responses, from postural habits and behaviors that we develop. Sometimes if we do a hobby long enough, say cycling or something like that, we find that those muscles become quite dominant in some areas. And some areas, for instance, say cycling, the muscles get really tight through the front of our body and they get stretched through the back. And in situations like that, that starts to change your posture because it's a new normal. It's something that you do a lot of the time. Also surgeries and, injuries, these sorts of things start to change the way we move and the way that we hold ourselves with our posture. And so if you do feel that your muscles are staying chronically tight, you'll also know that they fatigue quickly. Because if your muscles are constantly tight, it means a lot of energy is needed in your body to keep holding that contraction. So metabolically, that's quite exhausting to do that all the time. And consider the stress and the strain that it's going to create also on your skeletal system, on your joints. If you've constantly got tight muscles, it's going to affect the alignment and the health of a joint. So if you lose voluntary control of your muscles or muscle groups, we know this is going to have a huge impact because your muscles work as groups or they work as units. So the old-fashioned thing of stretching a hamstring, we know scientifically that's not going to help because muscles work in a group. So if a hamstring's tight, we know that there's a whole chain of muscles that are affected, not just the hamstring. And that's why hamstring stretches have a massive amount of limitation. And that's just one area to consider. You see, in Total Somatics, we stand back with a global approach and with soft eyes, knowing that scientifically muscles tense and tighten through patterns because your brain is a pattern creator. And so if we've got certain muscles that are chronically tight, it's going to affect patterns of movement and rhythm. And I'd like to ask you for a moment, have you ever noticed how you walk or how you stand? Do you find that you get quite wooden and stiff as you walk? Do you feel that when you walk, your strides have become shorter? So you don't have such big paces or big strides. Again, if you're finding that you're doing little steps, that's a huge indication of very tight areas in your hips, for instance, which we know are going to impact other areas too. Have you noticed there's no rhythm? So you haven't got that shock absorbency. There's no bounciness there. Maybe you feel very fragile with your back as you go to bend and twist. It feels, some people have sometimes said to me, it feels like their back's going to snap on them. Have you ever felt that? Because that doesn't have to be your new normal. We can change that. But did you know why that's been happening for? Well, the reason is that your brain has basically lost the ability to fully contract and fully release your muscles. And so if your muscles are chronically tight and you're feeling this pain, there's some really common advice that you may have heard in the past. If you'll say you've got a bad back, for instance, your painful back, you might get told to strengthen your core, to strengthen those muscles. Now, strengthening is really, really important. We know that. However, if you strengthen a muscle that isn't under your full control, because your brain at this point is holding it subconsciously chronically tight. What's going to happen is if you try and strengthen an already contracted tight muscle, you're just going to strengthen your pain. Because until you've learned how to fully release and get back voluntary or conscious control of that muscle, you're just amplifying your pain. You're just making your body tighter. So strengthening is really important. However, we need to have full control, conscious control of your muscles and your movement first before we can re-educate them with strengthening. And that's why total somatic education is so, so important, because that is the part that's missing in many areas where there's pain. And so consider this, you can't fully strengthen and control a muscle until you have full control. You know, the same thing happens is if you think you can stretch a muscle, again, academically, you think you're stretching a muscle, but remember your brain is the control center for everything. And unless we connect what's going on in your muscles back to your brain and wake up that communication, your muscles are going to stay chronically tight. And if you try and strengthen them and you haven't learned how to consciously take full control of the movement, you're just going to tighten it. And if you try stretching a muscle that's been contracted from the brain level, you're not going to change the belly of that muscle. It's not going to release that tension. If anything, it's going to stretch either side of the belly of the muscle and put strain on the ligaments and tendons and the joints. So sometimes people feel achy after stretching, or they feel a cramp and a spasm. And if you feel cramping or spasm when you've been stretching, that's where you can see it's not been mindful, because if we're listening to where the end range is of the movement to brain connection, the muscle to brain connection, you would know that we would stop before that trigger would kick of cramping or fatiguing. And so that's why the reason that I'm reaching out to you is that we actually want to release these chronically tight muscles in a smart, intelligent, scientific way, not the old-fashioned patterns where stretching used to be considered. But of course, as we know, stretching has changed over the years. Remember, they used to say stretch before exercise and stretch afterwards. And then the sports science showed that stretching doesn't really do anything for performance or muscle output beforehand. So people said, let's just start warming up, moving our body. Do you see? Starting to stimulate, activate between the brain and also your muscles. And likewise, on the other side of it, the stretching is very limited now because people are moving towards seeing how movement is medicine, and stretching doesn't change anything at a brain level. The reason I'd like to share the importance of a scientifically based method we use in total somatics is because what it's going to do is wake up this autopilot where parts of your brain have simply gone into autopilot and told those muscle groups to stay chronically tight due to stresses, to habits, behaviors, injury, repetitive hobbies, those sorts of things. And unless we change and break that autopilot setting in your brain, you'll continue to have chronically tight muscles. And so do you remember at the beginning, I said there was this funky title I was going to tell you about? Well, the expression is called sensory motor amnesia. And so sensory motor amnesia is where parts of your brain, the sensory and motor parts of your brain, which sense and feel and create movement, have basically developed a sense of amnesia. They've simply forgotten how to contract, how to relax, so efficient muscle memory, in everyday activities. And this leads to your muscles becoming chronically tight. And so until we break that sensory motor amnesia and reintroduce with the scientific process we use in total somatics, until we actually break that loop, you will continue to hold chronically tight muscles, and you'll also be very unaware of where the natural end ranges of your movement. So if you try doing things like stretching, it's going to trigger cramping and spasming. And so I'd like to encourage you to consider basically the research has moved from years ago from stretching, and we now know that your brain is controlling everything to do with your muscles, whereas stretching has no change on a brain level. Whereas the three-step process that I teach you in total somatics does. It changes your brain real estate and it increases your internal and external awareness and coordination. It's really powerful stuff. And so total somatics will help you to reduce sensory motor amnesia with regular practice, and also it increases your internal awareness. Total somatics will also help to self-correct you. It will help you to monitor your movements and also assess and notice your posture from the inside out. And what it's also going to do is teach you skills and techniques on how to respond throughout life. And with that increased internal awareness, powerful tools and techniques that you can do to stabilize, regulate, and support your nervous system as we go through different trials and challenges in our life. So the next time we go into this next part of this little two-part series, as we're considering sensory motor amnesia, we're going to consider the importance of having a healthy posture. So I look forward to sharing that with you then. Until next time, all my love and best wishes. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and also forward this on to somebody you know will benefit. To learn more about pain relief, plus how to improve your health and well-being, go to totalsomatics.com. Until next time, take care.